Welcome to the eShopper Reviews Podcast, episode 21. This is the podcast for December 2022. I'm Jenn Ip.
And I'm Jake McNeil.
For those new to this podcast, eShopper Reviews is a subreddit on reddit.com where Jake reviews games on the Nintendo Switch platform, and you can find this subreddit at the URL reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. We currently have over 2,000 reviews and counting, and we are supported by your donations on our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. This month's sponsors are Andy Miller, X Lane, Homer Simpin, Johannes, Talisa, Eli Goodman, Francis Ops, Gabriel Coronado Medina, Ilya Zarev, Christopher Wolf, and Seth Christianfeld. Thank you all for helping to keep the reviews coming. Now on to the patron-voted games.
So there's a whole lot to go through here because we had a total of 4 votes, and only a few of those votes were decisive. So we had 2 that were the standard monthly votes, and those 2 were going to be combined to get 2 results. And we made one of the 2 available to anyone who wanted to vote on them, and one of them was just for the sponsors. So basically the sponsors get one, and everybody else gets one.
Mm-hmm.
For the sponsor one, we know specifically the game that we're going for the sponsor one, which is Ollie Ollie World. That one got the most votes out of both the 2 different things of votes, if that makes sense. But for the second one, there wasn't really a decisive winner. So it is a multiple-way tie, and I get to be the tiebreaker because I'm always the tiebreaker. Is a multiple-way tie between Beacon Pines, Nier Automata End of Yorha Edition, Portal Companion Collection, Return to Monkey Island, Sifu, Sonic Frontiers, Tinykin, Tunic. Whew. So I will be reviewing in December Ollie Ollie World and at least one of those games that I just named.
Mm-hmm.
The second vote was the all-patron budget vote.
Okay.
And again, we had one that was open to all patrons and one that was open to everyone, patron or not. And we combined kind of the results of these 2, and we have one decisive answer and one that it could be one of any number of them. So the one that was a clear winner here was a game called Windmill Engine.
Okay.
But the other one, it's a tie between Unstrung Legacy, Escape Lala Retro Point-and-Click Adventure, Heroic Pirates, Horror Stories, Ink Cipher, Pocket Rockets, and Rocket Cows.
Do you have an idea of which ones for the tiebreakers you're going to choose?
Not as of this recording. And I should mention, we are recording this prior to the Thanksgiving weekend and all of that stuff. So there's still a chance for one of the votes to change by the end of the month. And I'm thinking I'll post a reminder to people just so that they have a chance to speak
please
up.
vote.
So this may well change between the time of this recording and when the recording is actually released. So I don't know, we'll see. But at least for now, it looks like those are the lead contenders. In any case, out of all of those games I just mentioned, I will be reviewing 4 of them. Or I suppose there's a possibility if the vote really changes that I could be reviewing 4 completely different ones. But that's as it stands as of this recording.
Well, we already have decided for next month's vote, which you commented Metacritic user scores.
So for the last few monthly votes, I've been focusing specifically on games from 2022 because I wanted to get in as many reviews for 2022 games as I could before the end of the year, on the off chance one of them was really good and could make it into my end of the year awards. Well, the next vote won't be decided until we're already in January, won't make it into this year's awards or anything. So I'm like, let's do something completely different. And number one, none of the games in this month's round of voting, this upcoming month's round of voting, I should say, will be for any games that are in 2022. These are all prior to 2022. And number 2, I've done votes like this before where I looked at what games had the best Metacritic scores that I have not yet reviewed. This one I decided to go about it differently. And these are all the games with the best Metacritic user scores.
Hmm.
So we're not going with critic scores here. We're going with what the Metacritic users say are the best games that I have not yet reviewed on the Switch.
Interesting.
Both for the monthly vote and for the all-patron budget game vote.
Okay, so for the first round, we have Superliminal, Fatal Frame, The Maiden of Blackwater, Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX, Dynasty Warriors 9 Empires, and Madison.
Yes.
And then for the all-patron budget game vote, we have Tori 3D, Diniho Adventures, Squidlet, MacBat 64, Journey of a Nice Chap, and oh, Sir, the Insult Simulator.
Now, I have to say, for the all-patron budget game vote, there are not a lot of Nintendo Switch games that are under the $2 mark that actually have a Metacritic user score. So when you get down to Oh Sir, the Insult Simulator, that one actually does not have a great Metacritic user score. It is still one of the 5 top highest rated games under $2 that has a Metacritic user score.
Interesting. All right, so let's move on to the game categories. Keep in mind, these are not games that came out in November. These are just games that Jake decided to review in the month of November.
Although some of them came out in
Some
November,
of them, yeah. All right, so we'll start with your noteworthy reviews, which is just one game. It's called New Terra.
Before I start, so this game was, we were given a review copy from the very kind folks at Polyfox. Thank you again to Polyfox for sending this. We always appreciate it when we get review copies from publishers and developers because it gives me a chance to review games that I might not otherwise get around to playing. I mean, granted, it's one of those, ideally I will get around to it eventually kind of things, but there are thousands upon thousands of games on the eShop, and it'll take me a while to get to all of them, if I'm even able to, by the time I'm 100. Up until recently, I have found that the games that I've been given review product for have generally fallen into a kind of comfortable middle ground. Usually, they're good, not great, not horrible, but they're good. Occasionally, I'll have one that I'm like, oh, this is really, really good. But usually it's good, not great, not horrible. New Terra, I am very sorry to say, is the first game that I was provided a review code for that it's not good. I will say, as a pretty inexpensive indie game, the visuals in this game are surprisingly good for the budget, surprisingly good given the indie direction this is coming from. And it's got a decent concept. This is kind of like a cross between a two-stick shooter and the really old classic game Lunar Lander, where you're less interested in trying to shoot off aliens than you are managing your fuel supply and trying to make sure you don't crash into things. But this game has all sorts of problems. First and foremost, every level has a map, but you cannot access this map when you're in the level. You're only shown it prior to being in the level. And this is kind of important because it is absolutely vital for you to know where all of the fuel refills are, where the goal is. And in each of the game's levels, you have to get to the place that you're going, the destination, and then work your way back to the origin point. Okay, that can work, but when you're trying to figure all of this out and, what's the best route to take and how do I change things, not having access to a map in the middle of things is
bad.
Yeah, it's not fun. But that's not the only issue here. Another issue is talking about the map. If you are not next to a wall or anything, you have no idea how far you are from landmarks while you're in the middle of nothingness. And again, if you're trying to conserve fuel, that's important to know. But really, the main issue that I had with this game is the difficulty is absurdly high. The game is fairly simple in its gameplay, but it's also extremely unforgiving, even on its easiest difficulty setting. When I say you have to manage your fuel, I mean that if you are even slightly inefficient in managing your fuel, you'll run out of fuel and die and have to restart the whole level. It's not fun, yeah. I really appreciate the developer for providing the review code, but I gotta be honest, this just is not a game that I would recommend to anyone.
All right. So moving on to hidden gems, we have Unpacking.
A bit of a minor spoiler for something we're going to talk about a bit later. There was a Indie World showcase where they revealed a game called A Little to the Left, which was about organizing household items. And that one really caught my eye. I thought it was really fantastic, to the point where I purchased the game when it came out and was immediately disappointed with it. I'll talk a bit more about that later, but I bring that up because Unpacking has a lot in common with that game. The main premise of the game is that you are looking at a household in various stages of the life of this person. You know, she's moving from household to household, and you're not seeing her, you're only seeing the items that are being unpacked from her boxes, and all you're doing is just putting them away. And the game is very loose about where you put things. Some things have to be in specific places, like you can't leave her diary out in the open. It has to be in a drawer, safe and sound. But for the most part, you're given free rein to put objects where you want. And that makes it a very easygoing game. There's not really a lot of challenge to it, but there also doesn't have to be. And there's something relaxing and meditative about opening up these boxes and just putting items where you feel like they belong. It's really pleasant. And I understand that some people really need action. They need fast-paced, intense. Yeah, this is not that. But if you're looking for something a bit slower paced and meditative, this is a wonderful game. I'm really sorry I missed it when it came out last year, because I definitely think I would have mentioned it in last year's awards. It was really, really a pleasant overall experience.
Next up is There Is No Game, Wrong Dimension.
I don't think I reviewed this one. Sorry, I'm without something to say about this. I don't even know why we listed it here. I understand it's a good game, I guess, but I don't have a review. I don't know what to tell you.
Oh, that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing. I planned on reviewing it, and I thought I had a review for it, but then, okay, we're we could keep this going on for a while, but we only have so much time. We don't want to waste your time. I did kind of something similar in the actual review of the game, of course. There Is No Game is kind of a fun little spin on a graphic adventure style game, where you go in and the narrator is arguing with the player, being like, oh, sorry, there's no game here. And you're messing around with different elements of the interface to turn it into a game, and he's getting constantly frustrated because you're insisting on turning it into a game when he's already told you it's not. And it kind of evolves beyond that, and it acts as a riff on all sorts of different games in the history of video games. Like, there's a little riff on Pong, there's a little riff on LucasArts adventure games, there's a riff on Zelda, and it's really super creative. The one thing that I would change is there's a lot of hunting around for things that you can interact with. One of those kind of classic frustrations of graphic adventure games. And it is present here. There's not much you can do about it, but I still think that the positive qualities of this game, it's highly, highly original. It's very amusing and funny. Definitely recommend it, especially to fans of the graphic adventure genre.
Card Shark.
Card Shark is another game where it has elements of graphic adventure, but it also has kind of some arcade style elements to it. You would think with a name like Card Shark, it would be more of a card game, but you don't actually do much actual card playing in the game.
Interesting.
Instead, the game's mechanics are solely focused on cheating, on different methods of forcing a card or shuffling the deck to mark a card, or, just different ways to play unfairly. And the actual play, playing poker or whatever, the game isn't so interested in that. It's like, you guys, you're not actually playing, because why would you play? At that point, you should know you're already going to win because you've cheated it to happen. That's interesting, and as the game progresses, it adds more and more of these mechanics, and there's kind of more trying to remember, okay, how do I make sure to cut the deck in this one? What direction do I press on the analog stick? And so it's kind of really playing with your memories of things. But the other element that I thought was really surprisingly good was the story. You play as a mute servant in a tavern who kind of becomes the protege of this very well-spoken and kind of, he's well-spoken and understanding, but also clearly has his own goals that he's working toward. And his name is Comte de Saint-Germain. The way that the game makes him seem like a really nice, pleasant guy, but at the same time, he's clearly picking the pockets of every single person that he comes in contact with,
Lovely.
Metaphorically.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also maybe possibly taking advantage of you, but kind of acting as your mentor. It's complex and layered, and it makes for a really fascinating character study of this guy who's really fascinating and you want to get to know better, but he's also kind of a sleaze.
Alright, so last one for the hidden gems is Super Duck.
This one came out of nowhere for me. I'm sure that I got it on some sale on the eShop where it was going for super cheap. And I was, okay, fine, Super Duck, whatever. I was expecting some kind of lackluster platformer or something, and was really delightfully surprised to find that this was a genuinely good puzzle platformer. And specifically, this is a puzzle platformer that is kind of like a spiritual remake of sorts of a classic game called Krusty's Funhouse. Krusty's Funhouse, for those who aren't aware, is a Simpsons licensed game back from the 8 and 16-bit era. So I think it was
that's why it sounds familiar.
Yeah, it was on the Nintendo and Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis and Game Boy, if memory serves. And the main premise behind that game was that Krusty had this funhouse. It was filled with rats, so you needed to create a path to guide them to the machine that would execute them. This game is a bit less cruel in that regard. You play the Super Duck, I guess, who's like an anthropomorphic man-sized duck person who is guiding a bunch of ducklings, not anthropomorphized, just ducks, with cute little quacks and everything. It's really nice, adorable. And you're trying to guide them to the exit in each level. And you do that by moving around blocks to make sure that they have a path that they can follow. The level design in this game is really good. The mechanics work. It has decent pacing. The one thing I would complain about is the platforming isn't quite as good as I'd like it to be. Your character jumps really high and it feels a bit weird, but I'm not terribly upset about it. It's overall a really good game. It's pretty inexpensive, and if you like puzzle platformers, it's well worth picking up.
All right, moving on to the worst games.
Okay.
Farm Tycoon.
Farm Tycoon makes my list of worst games because it is broken. I really tried to play this game, and multiple times as I was playing through its tutorial, there would be goals that I would have to meet. And I would do exactly what the tutorial is telling me to, and it wouldn't detect it as completed. And I figured it was a fluke. Okay, turn off the game, restart it. I'd get to that point and I'd pass it. I'd be like, okay, must have been some kind of weird one-off thing. And then it would happen again with some later goal. And it's like time and time again, the game failed to detect when I had completed the tasks it gave me. And this is a dry game right off the bat anyway. Like, it's dealing with a lot of the really technical details of farming from a top-down management simulation perspective, which, hey, could be fun. I like a good management sim, but not when it's broken and when it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And could not get past the stupid tutorial in this game because it kept messing up on me. And for me, that's just an instant fail. Fix your game, guys. Don't release it like this.
Next up is Robbie's Adventure, which is the patron vote.
This was the budget game patron vote for the previous month.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually the second all-patron budget vote selected game. The first month, we had Words with Freds, which was delightful.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Robbie's Adventure is not delightful. I would not pay $2 for this game. It's a really bad platformer. It's unforgiving, like one-hit kills that send you to the beginning of the level. The jumping mechanics are not fun. It's not always clear what you're supposed to be doing in a level. It's ugly. I kind of half expected that a lot of the all-patron budget-voted games would be along these lines, would be games that are cheap because they suck. And this is exactly that. It's cheap, and that's probably because it is a terrible game. It's not worth the cheap price. Don't bother.
All right, so the next one, okay, it's called Chris Payne Hero, roguelike dungeon shooter fire simulator counter FPS world.
With a title like that, how could it not be good, right? Well, as you can obviously tell, given that we're listing it amongst worst games, yeah, it was not good.
That's a horrible title.
Oh, it's an absolutely atrocious title. And the worst thing about it is, it doesn't even accurately describe the game. This is not a roguelike. The places that you fight through are not really traditional dungeons. Obviously, it's a shooter. It's a first-person shooter, so they got that word right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what fire simulator is supposed to be, but it's not a simulation game. And unless they're talking about the fact that you can fire your gun, which, yeah, that's how shooters work. Counter FPS sounds like it's a reference to Counter-Strike, which it plays nothing like. And then world, which implies that it's vast in scope, which, yeah, this doesn't... Okay, let me tell you what this game is. This is a very simple, kind of poorly made first-person shooter where the levels are randomly generated. So I'm sure that's where they get the roguelike from. But just because it's randomly generated levels, randomly selected enemies, and random weapons does not make it a roguelike. There are other elements that go into a game being a roguelike. And it doesn't do any of that stuff. It randomly generates levels from a selection of pre-made assets. It strings them together, and you have to get from the beginning to the end of each level. Problem being, number one, the shooting is not fun. Number two, the enemy AI is dumb as rocks.
Ooh.
Number three, the game is really buggy and unpolished. You'll be getting caught on scenery a lot. Enemies will be getting caught on scenery a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There's no sound for the pickups and a lot of the stuff in the game. It's just kind of bizarre and definitely not fun. There are tons of really great shooters on the Nintendo Switch, including ones that are super cheap or even free. And yeah, I have my issues with games like Fortnite and Overwatch 2, but my issues don't change the fact that, yeah, these are decent games that a lot of people enjoy. Chris Payne Hero, roguelike dungeon shooter, fire simulator, counter FPS world is not a game I can imagine just about anyone enjoying.
All right, so let's wash our hands of these atrocious games.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the best games.
All right.
We'll start with It Takes Two.
It Takes Two is a game that Jenn and I played together.
Mm-hmm.
And Jenn had played this previously on another platform. You played on PC,
yes.
I'm sure, right? Okay. And I'd heard about this game. I knew the premise, but I had not played it previously. So I was going in kind of fresh. And I thought this one was just delightful. The world design, the level design, the puzzle design, the boss design are all impeccable.
It's charming and brilliant.
And one of the other amazing things about it is, yes, it is a co-op game, but it is asymmetrical co-op. most of the time that you are playing this game, both of the characters will be doing entirely different things. And yet, everything that all of the characters are doing is still fun. You don't feel like you're missing out because the other person got the fun character.
Right.
Although, I will say, as I was playing this, I really got the strong feeling that, this might be the kind of game that you might want to play twice so that you can play through as both characters.
Maybe. I didn't feel that way about it. I felt perfectly fine with the character I chose.
One of the other things that I really liked about this game, it's got a fun story about a couple of parents who were looking to divorce, and then their kid makes one of those magical wishes that they stay together, and so the parents get shrunk down into these voodoo dolls of themselves and then are guided through this torturous gauntlet of challenges by a anthropomorphized book named Dr. Hakim, who has a wonderful personality, and he's such a mischievous character. I really thoroughly enjoyed him.
It's so quirky.
Yes, it is.
It's so quirky. It's a quirky game, and sometimes it really doesn't make sense, but you don't care. It's so fun.
It is. The game anthropomorphizes everything that's remotely related to the relationship that these two characters have. So, like, in one of the first levels, the big boss is this anthropomorphized vacuum cleaner that's really upset because the husband broke it and the wife promised that she would fix it and then didn't.
And just left it in the shed.
Yeah. And so you have to fight the vacuum cleaner that both of the parents neglected. And it's a really cute take on, again, the whole child's magical wish genre that gets me thinking of movies like Liar Liar.
Oh gosh, yes.
Great story, great voice acting, great characters, but also wonderful game design, wonderful level design, all of that.
I have so much praise for the level design.
Oh yeah. It's really good. And I've not played the other versions of this game, but looking at comparisons, you can definitely see how they've lowered the level of detail in the environment.
Yes, they did.
Graphically, it's not going to look as sharp as the other versions, but it still looks quite good on the Switch.
It runs well,
yeah.
And even if there isn't as much detail, the fact that it runs well enough is perfect to me.
And to the game's credit, they take full advantage of the game being on the Switch, not using gyroscopic controls or touchscreen or anything, but in making sure that pretty much every multiplayer option is open to the players. If you want to play it split screen on one TV, you can. If you want to play it via wireless local connection, that's fine. There's even a way to play it online using just one copy of the game, because they made a free download version of the game for the second player. You can't play the game free on your own, but if a friend of yours has the game already, even if they're across the continent, you can download the free version of the game to connect with their regular version to latch onto it. And that's kind of good because this is a two-player only game. You cannot play it in single player.
Nope.
It has to be played with a partner.
Next up, we have Xenoblade Chronicles 3.
Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is technically the fourth game in the Xenoblade series.
Okay.
Well, it went Xenoblade Chronicles X, which is kind of a spin-off. It is a part of the series, but it's not a part of the series proper. Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Then they remade the first game on Nintendo Switch. And now we have Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And I'm of two minds when it comes to Xenoblade Chronicles 3. On the one hand, I think it is a game that puts forward kind of the best qualities of every game in the series. It has some really good game design. It's just an overall good RPG, really good mechanics, and also I really like the characters and story. I think that all of those things, this game might be the best game in the series. On the other hand, I don't know what it is, but I just wasn't getting the wow factor in this game that each prior game in the series gave me.
Oh.
With the first Xenoblade game, you really got this feeling of awe with the massive environments, with the great flowing grass. And this was back on the Nintendo Wii, when it first came out. So they were really pushing that hardware. Then Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which came out fairly early into the Switch's life. And that one had some really beautiful cloud effects that made them just look lively and free-flowing. And again, very large environments. And this game also has large environments, but by this point it's like, yeah, we've kind of done that. And it's not quite an open world like Xenoblade Chronicles X was. It has some very large environments, but it's not a fully open world. So it's very, very good. But on some level, it didn't quite grab me the way that all of the previous games have. I'd say it's probably the best of the series. It just didn't make me go wow like the earlier games did.
Okay, we have Little Noah, Scion of Paradise.
This was a game that really surprised me. I had not really heard anything about it prior to trying it, but went ahead and popped it in, and I was surprised at what a good little action platformer roguelike this is. It has some surprisingly good visuals. It's got a great overall presentation. But what's really fun about it is the roguelike elements in this game are that as you're going through the game has what they call Lilliputites, which are these tiny sized little ghosty helpers who basically each one of them represents a move in your move set. So you can get, I think, something like 7 of them to make for a 5-attack combo plus a couple of special attacks as well. And when you collect them, you get to organize them within your inventory, so you get to decide which attack comes out first, which attack comes out late. Or you can go, I prefer this guy's special attack. Let me move him over to the special attack category. And you're doing this in each run. So in each run, all of your attacks could be totally different because you're stringing them together differently. You're getting different Lilliputites. It's a really refreshingly unique system for this style of game, and I really enjoyed it. Great game.
Rogue Legacy 2.
We're kind of getting a little ahead of ourselves in this, but at the same time, I did want to make mention of this because it's one of my favorite games that I reviewed this month. Rogue Legacy 2, again, another action platformer and roguelike that takes everything that was great about the first game and builds on it. Everything that was good in the original, they've retained it here. It still works fantastic, but they've added better animation. They've made it so that all the different classes are distinct and have their own unique abilities and stuff. There's more options for upgrades. And just overall, it feels like a much more evolved version of the previous game. And I think as a sequel, this is an amazing sequel. They did a fantastic job. Definitely one of the best games I played this month.
Okay, so the very last one for the best games category.
Yes.
Is Pokemon Scarlet and Violet.
I know why you wanted to save this one for last.
Well, we have a lot to talk about.
We do. Oh my goodness. So let's open this up to a talk about Pokemon in general to start with. I feel like over the course of the week that I reviewed all the Pokemon games that I had not yet reviewed on Switch, 3DS, and Wii U, our readers probably got a pretty good feel for where I stand on the Pokemon games. For those who are just listening, let me clue you in. I love the Pokemon formula. I think it is an amazing formula for a game that is always fun. However, with individual Pokemon games, I'm always looking for something that sets that game apart from the rest, because so often they feel cookie cutter.
Yes.
You feel like if you've played one, you've played them all. And every now and then, you'll get a game that really truly breaks free from that mold and does something unique. I feel like Pokemon Gold and Silver was an amazing first sequel to the original game. And then there was a lot of more of the same, more of the same, more of the same. And I know that some people weren't super thrilled with Pokemon X and Y, but that's another one where I'm like, they brought it into 3D. They made it easy to trade with anyone around the world online. And a lot of good features and just visually stepping it up. That was an amazing game. And then conversely, you have games like Pokemon Sun and Moon and Pokemon Legends Arceus, which didn't necessarily bring amazing features. Well, Arceus did, but I'll get to that. But they did something interesting with the story and world to make it unique. Like Pokemon Sun and Moon, in every element of that game, you felt the Hawaiian inspiration coming through. It really made it feel different. And Pokemon Legends Arceus, you really got the feeling that this was back in the before people really knew about Pokemon and they were all terrified of them, and you're really exploring this world for the first time. And they did that really well. And then the other thing we're going to be talking about, I'm sure, here is how Nintendo and the Pokemon Company and Game Freak have slowly crept up on the concept of open world within Pokemon games.
Yep.
Where Pokemon Sword and Shield kind of pretended at it by having these more open areas.
Yeah,
but it's like letting you loose in a park. You might have some illusion of openness, but it's really self-contained. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
Pokemon Legends Arceus went a huge step further, and now you have these vast open areas, but they're not interconnected. You have to jump from one to the next through menus and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So not really open world, but you still got a good feel of that. And before we get into it, just mentioning it, yes, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are the first true fully open world game in the series. So when I look at the games in the series that really stand out to me, the first game, Gold and Silver, X and Y, Sun and Moon, and Arceus, prior to Scarlet and Violet, those are the big ones in my mind. However, people have heard a lot about how I feel about Pokemon. Jen, how do you feel about Pokemon?
So, just like you, I've played it since the inception of Pokemon, the games. Mm-hmm. I kind of took breaks in between the franchise.
I did exactly the same thing, yeah.
Because it did feel very cookie cutter at some points. I think it's kind of outrageous how many Pokemon do exist, considering how you and I first started with, like, the first 151.
Mm-hmm. I think they've crossed the 1,000 mark at this point.
I really don't know, but it's still astonishing and outrageous. Mm-hmm. I have been wanting something more like Pokemon. Goodness, which one was it? It was a Pokemon game for the GameCube. Pokemon Coliseum or Pokemon Stadium?
It would have been Coliseum on the GameCube.
You start with an Espeon and an Umbreon, which is very odd.
I actually never played any of those games, so
really?
I can't help you there. No.
It felt this might be my nostalgia coloring my memories, but it felt very open world in a way that Sword and Shield kind of was.
Okay, like kind of pretending at or edging towards.
Yes. And I never did get to finish it, unfortunately. But that particular game stands out for me. X and Y also stand out for me for the reasons that you stated. Sun and Moon, I was kind of about, actually.
Okay.
I do agree with the fact that the aesthetics are very Hawaiian-like. Much more than I felt like Spain influenced Pokemon Scarlet and Violet.
Yeah.
The only aspects of the Spanish culture that I see in Scarlet and Violet is maybe the use of some Spanish words.
Hold on, before we get into really talking about Scarlet and Violet, because I wanna pick at your brain on this. So, I want to hear your thoughts on Pokemon Sword and Shield.
That's kind of my thought about it.
See, I try not to let this stuff get to me, but I gotta be honest, I was one of those people that was really, really frustrated with Sword and Shield because they took so much away from the Pokemon series in that game and replaced it with basically nothing.
So each Pokemon game for the past decade or so has like a new feature or something. Like we had Z moves in Sun and Moon, which I was okay, that's kind of fine. We had the Mega Evolutions, which please bring those back. I love the artwork. I love the concept behind it. And then I think Sword and Shield had the Giga Evolutions, which was basically giant
It's like
Pokemon.
Gigamax and Gigantamax, which, yeah, it was the same idea as the Mega Evolutions, except, well, but we're not going to do more artwork for all the Pokemon. We're just going to make it big.
Yeah, and that already turned me off to Sword and Shield. So,
see, what turned me off to Sword and Shield was this was the first modern game where they got rid of the national dex. You can now no longer catch them all in a Pokemon game.
Yeah.
And they kept giving excuses for why this was. Like, oh, well, we needed the time to work on the graphics. The graphics do not show that extra effort at all.
Honestly, I think it's just because there's too many Pokemon. There's too many to include it. Can you imagine having the national dex in Scarlet and Violet?
Except they specifically said at one point that they had updated all of their 3D models to future-proof them so that they could bring them into future games.
Right.
And you wouldn't need to put them in the game proper. You know, you wouldn't need to make it a part of the quest where they're all roaming around the world, but you could still allow people to trade them into the game. There's really... I mean, again, I'm not a programmer, so I'm not intimate with all the knowledge of this, but I cannot fathom that it would be difficult for them to put it all in there, given that they're just copy-pasting the information for the Pokemon they're already bringing over.
Yeah, again, I'm not a programmer either, but I am a little bit sad that the National Dex seems to be not included in most Pokemon games now.
I think Sword and Shield kind of started that trend, and they've kept it up through everything after. So now that we've talked about Sword and Shield, let's talk about a topic that I think you and I might disagree on, which is Pokemon Legends Arceus. I really loved it. I don't think you did.
I didn't. Well, first off, I didn't really play it. I just watched you play it.
Okay.
I was hopeful that it was going to be a good game, but I was so turned off by it from the graphics. It just wasn't polished enough for my taste. And yes, I know what people are saying about Scarlet and Violet's graphics.
Sure. We'll get to that. We'll get to
that. Aside from the more kind of open world feature of Arceus, there was not much there that interests me.
See, I feel like a lot of people are paying attention to the open world features of Arceus, which, granted, there's a very good reason for that. It was huge. It was a major step for the Pokemon franchise. But kind of, I feel like one of the secret little things that game did that was almost as revolutionary is the way that they streamlined the gameplay. Where you could just walk through a level and I'm going to be like, oh, I'll chuck a Pokemon at that. I'll chuck a Pokeball at that. I'll chuck a Pokeball over there. And you don't even need to stop to do any of this stuff. You can just run through a level chucking Pokeballs left and right, and it kind of does it for you. And on top of that, like how the game worked in stealth elements where you needed to sneak up on Pokemon and ambush them with the Pokeball. You could battle in the game, and the battles were good. It had a good new strategic element, but half of the fun in the game was sneaking around and popping a Pokemon in the back of the head with a Pokeball so you didn't have to battle it. And I really enjoyed it. I thought that, like many people thought, that it didn't go far enough. It wasn't a full open world. Didn't have a lot of the features we're used to in a Pokemon game. But it seemed like it established a good formula that they could build on. And we were like, okay, so maybe in a couple years they'll make something new that builds on this to make it the game that we've all been hoping that Pokemon would eventually become. Because everyone's been like, why isn't this series open world? It should totally be open world by now. That would be amazing. And as it turns out, we didn't have to wait a couple years for that because they were working on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet simultaneously. It was being developed alongside Pokemon Legends Arceus, which seems really an efficient way of going about it.
Agreed.
But from what I can tell, it looks like there are a lot of features in Scarlet and Violet that do build on what was introduced in Arceus. They do have a lot of that streamlining of features. You can now relearn moves from a menu. You can fast travel to places easily and quickly. It doesn't allow you to just choke Pokeballs left and right and pick up things or automatically catch Pokemon without fighting them. But now instead, you can send out a Pokemon and have them auto-battle opponents. And you get a fraction of the experience for doing so, but it still kind of cuts out a lot of the time-consuming elements of it, or at least in theory. So I really appreciated that. But of course, the big thing with this game, the big game changer is it is the first actual open world Pokemon game. Fully open world. So what did you, Jen, feel about the open world in this game? Did it impress you?
I would be more impressed if the graphics were better.
Yeah, we're not going to avoid this topic any longer. We got to talk about the graphics.
So when I first booted up Pokemon, and we both got Violet. When I first booted up Pokemon
we got Violet. Another mutual friend of ours got
Scarlet. Yes. So when I first booted it up, I booted it up on the handheld. Okay, yeah. So on the tiny screen. Mm-hmm. And at first I was like, what are people talking about? The graphics are fine.
I think that is also the first few areas of the game look really good. There's a lot of detail in the environments there. The characters look nice. The character animations look nice. And it gradually sets in, oh, that's what people are talking about.
Yeah, and then I moved over to, when I got to the first small city, Los Platos, I had moved it over to the big screen. And then I went, oh my.
I feel like where we had some complaints about Pokemon Legends Arceus lacking polish, this game basically looked at that and said, hold my beer. It has so many issues. Where do I even start? So the frame rates are a mess. They're inconsistent. Mm-hmm. And they get caught up every now and like when it has to load a new area, it'll freeze for a brief moment while it does it.
Yeah.
There is massive pop-in. Mm-hmm. There's an issue that I'm seeing a lot more in Nintendo Switch games. Monster Hunter Rise had it, and Pokemon Legends Arceus had it. And that issue is that characters that are off in the distance, or things that are animating off in the distance, will have extremely choppy, low frame rate animations.
Yep.
And with those games, it was a little distracting, but for the most part, it was fine, because you had to look off in the distance to see it.
Yeah. It's worse.
Oh, it's so much worse in Violet and Scarlet.
It's like seeing the Nutcracker walk through Los Platos.
You could look literally like one city block away from you, and the people that are walking around, it's like 1 frame per second. It's like not even stop motion animation. How bad it looks. Mm-hmm. It is a problem that is pervasive throughout the entire game, and it's not even always in the distance. There was one time I was literally standing next to a Pokemon. It was, I think, Vivillon, one of those moth Pokemon, and literally standing right next to it, and its animations were horrendously bad.
Ooh.
Another issue is that there are some textures that are really, really low quality, or conversely, textures that are repeated in ways that just look ugly. You could look out on a cliff face and see the exact same section of rock copy-pasted hundreds of times on that cliff face.
Yikes. Talk about lazy.
There's this one scene early in the game where you've been told, okay, let's go to the top of this lighthouse. Let's go to the top of this lighthouse. You got to get to the top of this lighthouse. Okay, get to the top of the lighthouse. And you get there, and the game acts like you are looking on this magnificent view of the area, the Paldea region or Paldea region. And the soundtrack flares up, and it's all presented in this cinematic manner. And you're looking out on this landscape that is blurry and half put together, and there's a lot of popping.
Obscured by clouds.
And it's like, game, this is not the impressive flex that you think it is. You want me to be impressed by this, but right now you made it a point to highlight one of the ugliest things in this game. You really should have thought this through before you made a big deal about this. This was not the Breath in the Wild, walking over the crest of the ridge moment that you thought it would be. And the thing is, a lot of these problems are not consistent. There are some places in the game that look gorgeous. There are some places where the animation is amazing. When you're in a battle against one of the gym leaders, the gym leader animations are wonderful. Individual little Pokemon animations, at least when you're right next to them, look great. The character designs look fantastic. But more often than not, the graphical issues, the performance issues with this game are ugly to the point of distracting, to the point of it might even be interfering with the gameplay some.
Yeah. So you might be wondering, Jen, if Arceus's graphics made you not want to play the game, why aren't you touching Scarlet and Violet? Like, wouldn't you just want to run? And I would agree, except there's so many features that are fun and nice in Violet and Scarlet. So what, I guess, saved the game for me were the different features. Yes, it is open world, which means that there are Pokemon roaming everywhere, to the point where you really have to watch where you step.
Oh, you can trip over Pokemon just trying to get from point A to point B.
Yeah. I love the crafting element is a nice touch. You can craft your own TMs.
I really like that, and I feel like it also gives you a good reason to explore beyond just, well, let's see if there are Pokemon over here I haven't encountered
Exactly.
yet. Like, maybe there's a new TM over there, and if I find a new TM, it means I'll be able to craft a zillion copies of it, if I want.
And exploring isn't as adventurous as other open world games, but it's still enough to kind of entice me.
So I feel like when you first start the game, your traversal options are extremely limited. One of the quests that you can choose to go through, the mythic quest or the legendary quest, whatever they call it, the one where you fight the giant versions of the normal Pokemon.
Yes. For the Mythica herbs, I think.
Every one of those, yes, exactly. Every one of those that you complete gives you better traversal options. The first one allows you to dash using your rideable Pokemon. The second one allows you to ride on water. And I feel like before you start taking on those quests, even though it is an open world, that world is naturally segmented into areas by the natural features of that world. If there is a huge cliff face over to your side, you're not going to be crossing that cliff face, even though you theoretically could, because it's an open world. If there's a river dividing you from another section of land, you're not going to be crossing that river to get over there, even though you theoretically could, at least until you start unlocking those traversal abilities. So I feel like, yes, it is an open world, but early into the game, it's kind of hard to feel the full impact of that.
Yeah. Like, probably hour 3, you could probably feel like...
Well, it really depends. It depends how you're going about the game, but I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're talking about early into the game, you have to visit, like, an academy. And then after that point, it opens up and says you could go this way, you could go that way, you could do whatever.
Yeah, there's, I think, 3 main storyline things that you can do. And the game lets you decide on what you want to do, or if you want to do all 3 of them together. I like you can set your own pace for this game.
What I really like, and what I feel like sets this game apart from Pokemon Legends Arceus, in Pokemon Legends Arceus, you had these mass open areas, and then there wasn't a heck of a lot to do in those areas. You could basically fight Pokemon, catch Pokemon, or go about the forwarding the main quest line.
Yep.
That was pretty much it. There wasn't really any gym trainers to fight. There weren't any gyms. There weren't any randos in the area that you could pick fights with, have Pokemon battles. There wasn't even a way to do multiplayer Pokemon battles with people. It was very odd in that regard. It was a fun world to explore, but it didn't really give you much reason to explore it aside from, well, there might be a Pokemon over there you don't have yet. Maybe you should check that out.
Yeah.
And Pokemon Scarlet and Violet expands on that greatly. Yes, you can still go around looking at new areas to see if there are new Pokemon that you haven't gotten yet. Or you can be like, well, maybe there's a new TM over here I haven't gotten. Or maybe if I search that set of ruins over there, I might find a Gimme Ghoul coin. There are these little, it's a tiny little Pokemon that you encounter throughout the world, usually standing in conspicuous spots in ruins or under bridges or stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And as I understand it, one of the Pokemon in the game, a Pokemon called Gimme Ghoul, it looks like a mimic. It's
it's a little tiny person inside a treasure chest.
Yes. And apparently you need these Gimme Ghoul coins. When you collect enough of them, you can evolve that Pokemon. And it's a really clever way to add another element to the game to give you a reason to search for stuff. I feel like they did a really good job filling this world with things to do. And
exactly.
That's something that I don't think Arceus did nearly as well.
And that would have bored me to death if I played Arceus, and I'm so glad they fixed that in Scarlet and Violet. And yes, the visuals aren't great. There was a moment where I was like, I really just want to play this game on my handheld instead of the big screen TV. You get used to it.
The other thing that we made it a point to test out was the multiplayer, and
I'm a little disappointed by it. A little.
I like it and I hate it.
Yeah.
Basically, you can invite up to 3 friends to just walk around the same world with you.
Mm-hmm.
And at any time, you could theoretically cross paths with them, do a little emote and say hi. And I think that's kind of cool. But at the same time, the game doesn't really give you much reason to do it. There are these Terra raids, and we should get into the Terra Pokemon in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
There are these raids that you can do with your friends, but they don't need to be with you to do them.
No, they don't.
And of course you can do the standard Pokemon things with your friends. You can trade, you can battle, that kind of stuff. But this is an open world game where you can play it co-op, and the game gives you no reason to do that.
Not really, no.
In fact, now that I think about it, comparing this game to X and Y, I remember X and Y had a feature where you could trade Pokemon with the world at large. Basically, you could put out a want ad, hey, I have a Houndoom, I'd like to trade it for a Grimer. And anyone online could look at that and go, I'd like a Houndoom, and I have a free Grimer. Here, I'll take you up on that.
Mm-hmm.
And that feature is no longer present here.
Ooh, that's kind of sad.
They have something, I forget what it was called. It was like a random trade or a wonder trade or something.
Yes, wonder trade.
Where you can put any Pokemon up for this kind of mystery trade and get a Pokemon in return. But pretty much universally, every single time that I have tried this, the Pokemon I get in return is one of the first Pokemon in the game that you see like right after the start.
So I think that one, though, will get better over time as people evolve and catch more Pokemon.
Maybe, but there's not really any reason to put a good Pokemon up for trade.
Mm.
The only reason that you would do that is if you're like, well, I have a dozen of these starter Pokemon that I made with eggs and don't really have any reason to keep them. Screw it, I'll trade away the extra ones.
Right.
But most of the time, it's just going to be people being like, hey, I caught one of these Fidos that are in the first area. Let me see if I can get something actually good by putting this out there.
Right.
And whoever's trading for it, well, they'll be stuck with the crappy one. It's an interesting idea, but it's not executed in any way that makes it particularly good or useful.
Okay, but we do generally agree that this is a good game.
So that's the thing. I'm not blind to the graphical and performance issues of this game. I fully understand that, and I do not gloss over that one bit.
I don't either.
It is not okay that a game released in 2022 should look as bad, should perform as bad as this game.
Mm-hmm.
There's not really any excuse for that. And if things continue in this direction, if they continue to progress to get worse and worse looking over time, because I think you'd agree with me, this game's graphical issues are worse than Pokemon Legends Arceus, yeah?
I would agree, yeah.
This game is
I shouldn't be catching Pokemon from the underworld.
This game is far less polished than Pokemon Sword and Shield was, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this tells me, at least when you're just talking about graphics and performance, this series is on a downward trend.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not good. If the next Pokemon game that we get is even worse than this, there's going to be some serious problems. But having said that, despite recognizing that this game has serious issues, those issues don't really change the fact that it's still an extremely fun game.
Oh, yeah.
It does the Pokemon formula very well, and it is the actual open world Pokemon game we've been looking for decades now.
Mm-hmm.
And this game still doesn't have the national dex. I'm still frustrated that Sword and Shield removed the national dex without replacing it with anything. This game at least replaces that with something new. And that's what I'm always looking for in a Pokemon game. Do something different, do something new. If it's story, if it's a really unique world, or if it's some kind of new gameplay feature that really changes things. Oh, we didn't talk about the Terra Pokemon, the terrestrialized stuff. So this is kind of this game's, like, their take on Mega Evolution or the Gigamax, that kind of stuff. Instead of all that stuff, you don't have a giant Pokemon, but every single Pokemon in the game has what's called a terrestrialized form, or a Terra form, or Terra type. Which is, let's say you have
Quaxly.
We'll go with Quaxly. Okay, one of the starters. Quaxly is the water starter.
Mm-hmm.
So Quaxly has a water type, but in addition to its type, it could also have a Terra type. Most Pokemon are going to have the same Terra type as one of their normal types. So Quaxly, your Quaxly, I'm guessing, probably has a water Terra type.
He does.
I got a Fuecoco. My Fuecoco is a fire-type Pokemon. He has a fire Terra type.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other Pokemon that you can get that have a completely different Terra type than their normal type. And what the Terra type does, how that comes into play is, you can, once per battle, or once, basically you have to recharge it at the Pokemon Center after you use it. So you only get one shot at it before you have to go back to a Poké Center and recharge it. But basically, if you're like in a multiplayer battle or whatever, one time per battle, you can choose one of your Pokemon to have it become its Terra form, or Terra type, which changes it into this kind of like crystallized version of the Pokemon, and it changes its type to whatever that type is. If it is the same type as what it had previously, it basically supercharges that type of moves.
Yep.
So your Quaxly, which has a water type and a water Terra type, if you were to terrestrialize it, you would basically be saying, for the rest of this battle, all of its water moves are going to be supercharged.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, if you have what's a good example of a non-starter Pokemon in this game? A Pikachu.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you have a Pikachu whose Terra type is a flying type. If you terrestrialize that Pikachu in the middle of the battle, it ceases to be its normal electric type and becomes a flying type Pokemon, supercharging all of its flying type moves. So you could be in the middle of a Pokemon battle and someone brings out their Pokemon that has a type weakness to yours, and you're like, ha ha ha, I got you now. And then suddenly they use their Terraform thing or whatever, their Terra type, and completely upend the battle and change it to be something different. I think this adds a really fun strategic element that's actually genuinely different than the Gigamax or all of that stuff, the Mega Evolutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly prefer it to those. I think it's wonderful. It's not necessarily as visually interesting as having the Mega Evolutions.
Agreed.
Because they created entirely new designs for those. But I like the fact that it's universal. It's not specific Pokemon that do it. All Pokemon in the game have Terra types. And it means that when you're in the middle of a battle, at any moment, a Pokemon you think you have an advantage against could turn the tables on you. Or you could supercharge a Pokemon that you know is strong against the opponent, so you could maybe get in a one-hit kill really easily. There's a lot of strategic possibilities here, and I'm sure that the competitive scene of Pokemon players are just eating this up.
Oh, yeah.
So overall, recognizing that this game has massive problems, I still think that it is a wonderful game.
I mean, I want to play it right now.
Me too. So I ultimately gave this game a grade of A-, which is kind of a balance of those two things. Like, the amount that I'm enjoying it, I feel like it almost deserves more, but at the same time, I cannot ignore those major issues. And so hopefully this grade reflects that kind of balance of those two things that I'm talking about there.
Right. So now do you want to talk about the Indie Direct?
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay. Why don't we just talk about which ones that we're looking forward to?
Oh, we're going to do the quick and dirty version of this, right?
Mainly because I gotta go soon.
Oh.
Yes.
Jen is super busy, apparently.
Mm-hmm. So I really liked the first one from the Indie World. Okay, so this is the November 2022 Indie Direct that we're talking about.
Yes.
I really liked Venba,
Okay.
which was the first one on their showcase. Mainly because it's about food and the immigrant story.
Okay.
I'm
just
curious,
the story appeals to you?
Yeah, I'm curious to see how they incorporate those two things together.
Mm-hmm.
I also need to check out the first Coffee Talk game.
Oh, yeah.
Because Coffee Talk Episode 2, Hibiscus and Butterfly, is coming out spring 2023.
I really enjoyed the chill vibes of the first Coffee Talk. So I'm definitely looking forward to the second one. And it's really good story, too. Like, the whole premise behind the game is it's set in this world where it's kind of this modern world, but it's set in a world where there are vampires and orcs and ghosts and aliens and those kinds of things. And it's all those weird characters dealing with a lot of the issues that we have in our world. Like, in the first game, there was one couple that was struggling with the fact that the woman was a succubus and the guy who was an elf was having to deal with his parents judging her for what she was. And, you know, basically saying, hey, I want to be with you. I don't care that my parents, you know, think that you're scum. You know, what they think doesn't matter anything to me. And, you know, the fact that it's going through this kind of human drama with these fantastical characters in a modern environment, that's really refreshing, and I really enjoyed it. And so the sequel looks like it's bringing back some of the old characters, but it has some new characters as well, and I'm definitely interested to continue on in that world and see more of it.
Have a Nice Death. I do not do side-scrolling platform games. I don't. But I really wish I did, because it looks amazing. The combat looks astounding and complicated, which may or may not work to my advantage.
Yeah, it has a really nice art style, really fast-paced action. Definitely looks like it could be good.
And Death basically is cleaning up his departments. And I'm also really looking forward to Blanc.
Blanc was a game that was shown in a previous Indie World Direct.
I remember.
But they gave it a release date this time around. And yeah, it still looks wonderful. I completely agree.
I love the fact that there's no text. It's all based on expressions and animation.
Oh, what I think is amazing is that it's a completely monochrome world. And it's visually stunning.
Oh, yes. Botany Manor, I am curious about too.
Okay.
I don't have high hopes for it, just from what I saw, but I'm curious to see what other people will say about it.
It looked like it could be interesting, yeah.
And Desta, The Memories Between, that looks interesting too. Mainly, it seems very abstract to me. I don't know if I will like it, but I'm curious again to see what people say about it.
Okay.
Is that it?
Well, I have to go through my opinions, or we're just talking about what Jen likes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, going from the start of the Direct toward the end, I think pretty much nearly every game in this Direct looked good to me. I don't think any looked bad. I'm not sure about Once Upon a Jester, but at the same time...
That one kind of hit me weird.
At the same time, it is an interesting idea, so I'll definitely give it a chance. However, the first game in this Direct that really grabbed me was Pepper Grinder.
Oh,
The
yeah.
gameplay in this looks really fun. It's got this kind of fast-paced platformer gameplay where you're drilling through everything with this drill. It reminds me a little of the Game Boy Advance game Drill Dozer, but the gameplay is very different in this, it looks like, because you're having to draw these paths through the dirt to get to where you're going. Looks really fun. I really look forward to this one. Of course, we talked about Coffee Talk episode 2. Definitely looking forward to that. The next game that really caught me, kind of surprised me, Dordogne. The art style in this game is absolutely gorgeous. With these, it's like this painterly style manipulated to be 3D. It's just a beautiful looking game, and I want to see more of it. A couple of games interested me so much that I went ahead and purchased them and reviewed them already. And those were Rogue Legacy 2 and A Little to the Left. And I've already said that Rogue Legacy 2 is one of my favorite games that I've reviewed this month.
Okay.
A Little to the Left, not so much. It was okay, but I didn't get that relaxing feeling of sorting things that I got from Unpacking, the game Unpacking.
Right.
One of the big problems with the game is that there are these puzzles that you're supposed to be solving by sorting things, but it's not always clear what the game is looking for, what criteria.
Yeah.
And that was frustrating. Let's see, what else really caught my eye in this direct? It's not a game that caught my eye per se, just one that I've heard a lot of really good things about, and that is Inscription. I have not played this one. I know that it's been released on other platforms, and it's got a lot of really good word of mouth, so I'm super interested to see what it looks like on Switch, but yeah, I don't know much more about it, so I can't really say. And then, of course, the big game for this direct was Sports Story. I know this might not have stuck out to you,
not really,
Jen,
no.
But this game is the sequel to Golf Story, which was one of the first early indie hits on Nintendo Switch, which is kind of like a golf RPG. And this game looks like it's going to be expanding on it greatly, going into all kinds of different sports, having some more RPG elements, having a whole big story you're going through. But for the longest time, people were like, we know this game is coming, but when? We've been waiting for an update on this game for, I want to say, maybe a year and a half. It's been crazy. So it's wonderful to finally get an update on when we're expecting to get this game, and to find out that it's going to be coming in December is really wonderful. Definitely looking forward to this one.
So that wraps things up for this month's eShopper Reviews podcast. Again, we want to thank all of our patrons on Patreon for contributing. Patreon donors are the first ones to gain access to these podcasts, and if you're interested in becoming a donor, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. And once again, if you're curious to read any of the reviews or content mentioned in this podcast, you can find it on the eShopper Reviews subreddit at reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. Once again, this has been Jen Ip
and Jake McNeil.
We'll see you next month, and in the meantime, we both hope you found this content helpful and enjoyed some good games. Catch you all next time.
Later.